Okay, good evening. This is the March 17th meeting of the Charter Committee for the Town of Littleton. And we're still waiting for, let's see, who do we have? Oh, we do have Charlotte. Charlotte, welcome from Taiwan, right?
Thailand.
What is it?
Bangkok, yeah.
Bangkok.
Bangkok, Thailand, yeah.
Oh, Thailand. Thailand. Even more exotic. Okay, and welcome to Melvin and Anthony also. And here's Tim. All right, excellent. We're just missing Kyle, and I'm sure he'll find us pretty soon. Come on up, Tim. All right, so the agenda for tonight is we're going to go over a high-level work plan that we have a draft that was provided by our colleagues at Collins. And then we're going to start the discussion of the legislative branch, which is effectively town meeting and the warrant process and so on. And then we're going to do some minutes and talk about emails and things like that. And then hopefully we'll adjourn at a good time. All right. Everybody have a copy of the high-level work plan that was sent out by Collins? And I don't know, Anthony, do you guys want to say something? Maybe you want to start this out. Anthony or Mel, do you want to say something?
Yeah, sure. So let me share my screen. I know everybody's got it, but I always think it's helpful to sort of put it on the screen.
That's gonna be my next question.
So this is sort of the general work plan that we work with committees on, and we don't have to sort of structure it this way, but I structured it generally in sort of the way that we go through the various articles or items that should appear in the charter. One of the things which I'm sure I said to you before, but I'll just say it again, is that the work plan is structured sort of by the articles we generally see in charters. There can be, you may want to have an article that we don't usually see, that's something that the committee can decide, or you may not want to adopt one of the articles that sort of we recommend as generally appearing in articles. And again, that will change the work plan, but this is generally the structure that we follow. I will just draw your attention to the public comment or public hearing that are highlighted and have these asterisks here. They're in those locations for a couple of different reasons. One is the first public hearing is located at a place in the process where the committee will have produced some fairly meaty work that will allow the public something to sort of chew on at the public hearing to be able to comment on specifically. So again, those are things that the public generally knows about, the town meeting, the select board, the town administrator. And then the other important thing about this, where it falls, is relative to public engagement. We don't see a lot of engagement over the summertime as people are on vacation and doing other things. So in theory, it could be moved up or moved back, but I put it in September because I generally would sort of keep it after you finished your town administrator part. But we try to keep it out of the summertime so that people have the ability to, so that you get a good turnout when you have these types of hearings. And again, the last public hearing is in March after we pretty much finished the charter. But that, again, you may want to make modifications after you hear from the public based on what's written. Other than that, I would say even though it looks long, this is a fairly tight time frame to get through stuff. I'm sort of hoping, or I think we're shooting for being ready for the town meeting next year, but again, depending on the discussion and how quickly we move through things, that may or may not happen. So that's just some high-level things to consider, and I'll turn it back over to you. And Mel, I'm sorry if you wanted to share anything about the timeline.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
I think this is what we were hoping for to start with, right? I mean, Kevin, I think you brought it up originally, and that's a good starting point, right?
I think I took a shot at something, and I think it includes a lot of what I threw down. I have a couple of questions. So I see toward the top, March, April legislative branch. I was looking at the PowerPoint that you presented at a prior meeting, and on, I don't know, the fourth or fifth slide, there's a slide called Common Features of Modern Charters. And there's a whole bunch of different areas. Are we just going to dive down into the legislative branch on that slide, or are we diving down into some of those other bullets also on that slide?
So these encompass all the things that were on the slide. The slide, I presented the the elements of the charter sort of in the way they appear. So, Article 1, Article 2, so on and so forth. I think the legislative branch is usually Article 2, and then select board would be Article 3, and so on. We don't do it in that order, so the way they're ordered in the charter, because sort of I found in working with committees that starting with the legislative branch is usually the best place to start as you're orienting yourself to this process, primarily because in this context, the town meeting form of government, most citizens have a grasp. I don't want to say too good or too bad, but they have a grasp of the town meeting. They've been to it. It's probably a thing that your residents are most familiar with and feel like they have the greatest stake in. So starting here and sort of thinking about what you want to do here, and there may or may not be changes. It's usually a good place to start to sort of get your feet wet and to move forward. And even though it's an important topic, it's not necessarily the longest part of the charter. It's usually got about, I'd say, 3 or 4 sections. Mel, if I'm saying anything that you want to add to, please feel free to jump in.
No, just that the legislative branch is highly regulated by state law, the town meeting, and so we just thought it was an easier one, as the committee ramps up to take on. And also, I should mention, you have your town moderator on your committee as well, so we know that you have sort of a resident expert there when it comes to town meeting. But those issues in a modern charter that we presented, we will be incorporating those items and those issues as we get through the various items or the sections of this work plan.
Okay.
Could I jump in with
Please.
a question? This is Karen. I mean, these are just headings. Could you give me a sense of what else is involved in each topic? I know we talked the last time about, there may be interviews with different people on different committees, and I don't know that we need to do that for every step, but generally, what are some of the
I'm going to defer to Collins
action
again to
items?
talk us through how this usually works. Did you get Karen's question?
I did. So I guess to sort of answer that is, so you've got in front of you the memo that we proposed for today's meeting. So you're right, these are headings. The way it usually works, and we'll work with whatever the committee wants to do, is the memo is a good place to sort of start to get your understanding. What we recommend is that we sort of go through the memo, right? You'll meet with, particularly in the legislative branch and the select board and even the town administrator section, you'll probably meet with some stakeholders, officials in the community in these different areas to hear how things are actually done, which may or may not reflect best practice, or what we would consider best practices or trends, and that's for you to decide, and may or may not reflect what's already written perhaps in your bylaws. And after we've sort of reviewed the memo, had the opportunity to meet with some of the important stakeholders, then we'd actually sort of sit down and start drafting the language. And the memo sort of lays out some areas that are already covered in your bylaws, which some of them we may import into the new charter, some of them the committee may decide to keep in the bylaws. And then there are some other topics that aren't reflected in your current bylaws that we may recommend go into the charter, and so you'll consider those, and we have sample language for you to review there. I would say we usually don't start putting language in front of the body to start with, just because it can be overwhelming without some of the background, both through the memo and through meeting with municipal officials.
If I may. Anthony, as we go on, we start talking about town meeting. We're lucky to have Tim here as town moderator, but at the same time, would we be meeting with someone like the town clerk and people like that to get a feedback to bring back to the committee? One or two of us meeting with a set of questions that we can go into with her, and we don't have to do it with Tim because Tim's right here. This is the big benefit we have. But besides the town clerk, are there other offices that you think we should be talking to?
I think that's one of the, so when we put together the memo, we were thinking that you could take some time for this meeting to ask some questions of the moderator. It's usually good for the legislative branch to talk with the town administrator, maybe a member of the select board, and perhaps the town clerk. Different communities have different individuals involved in the warrant creation process. Obviously, the moderator manages the meeting, and the results of the meeting, we go to the clerk for the report of the meeting afterwards. Mel, do you want to chime in here about anyone else we may want to talk to later?
No, I think you've covered it. The select board and the town administrator is where the warrant gets produced, and the process of putting the warrant together. I think it's important for you to hear that. And the town clerk, I think, is also good, because the town clerk, I assume, assists your moderator in running the meeting, and as Anthony says, actually produces or publishes the votes and so on. So, I think that covers it, in my opinion. The finance committee is sort of an extension of town meeting in some ways, but as you notice, we have that in the fourth row. We have the finance committee as a whole separate discussion. So I think you don't have to talk to the finance committee yet about town meeting.
And I just see Charlotte's hand raised, Madam Chair, so.
Yep, okay. Charlotte?
Yeah, thanks. So just for clarity, based on what you've said, Mel and Anthony, and based on the memo and what I'm looking at here, can we reasonably assume that each one of these high-level headings, if we were to want to, which I don't think we necessarily do, but if we wanted to break it down further, that for each of these headings, we would get a memo, we would have some sort of orientation to the broader topic, including, for instance, in this case, what's included in the memo. We would essentially have some further work to be done. So that's kind of almost activity 2, which is talking to other committees, gathering information, discussing within the committee, and then some sort of consensus or decision around the recommendations that we glean from that, and then language is drafted around those recommendations. So if I'm reading you right, that for each one of these high-level headings, we'd have a similar set of kind of activities under each one that follows more or less, or tracks more or less with what I just said. Does that sound right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And we would do those kind of sequentially for each one versus waiting till the end and then generating all the language. It makes sense to sort of take these one at a time.
Yeah, sorry, I apologize for any confusion. So yes, we would be, before we moved on to the select board section, you would have at least looked at and sort of put your preliminary thumbs up or thumbs down on some actual draft language.
So one other question.
And so the reason that made this...
No, go ahead, Charlotte.
Oh, sorry. And so the reason that, for instance, this is not one meeting, one topic, is that there is some work in between each of these meetings, which we're having every 2 weeks. As subsequent to this meeting, we'll then have some follow-up, some questions to town officials. We'll come back, we'll discuss, and we'll have a sort of iterative process. That's the idea here.
Correct. And in fact,
Okay.
you may have some meetings where a member of let's say the select board comes and talks to the entire committee. Some committees do break into subcommittees to talk to individuals, but I've seen it work very well where you have someone come, and that could take up a whole meeting, depending on who you have come visit. But the short answer to your question is yes. It includes that iterative development.
Okay. That'll be interesting to see how many we have people just come in versus having somebody go out and talk to a couple people or not, how that works. Because that would, certainly things would get lost in translation, but sometimes you have to do that just to get things done, right? So we'll see. I think we can we'll work that as we go through it, I guess. Figure out how we all work together and how what makes sense for everybody.
Yep.
Okay.
If I could just follow up on a couple of points that have been asked or answered here. I think your point about, I guess I would have liked to have seen on the work plan communicating with various department heads. So I don't know if that's there and I'm missing it, but town clerk, finance director, various, and I thought we would be doing that throughout the course of this project. The other thing that I don't see on the project plan that I thought we talked about doing was possibly connecting with other towns who have gone through similar process or who might have something we could learn from. Did we talk about doing that?
Can I I'll give you my assessment based on what I've seen so far, and then you all can correct me if I'm wrong. So I think that the talking to the different people that you mentioned, fine, that's implied in here. When it says select board, that implies that we're going to go out and talk to the town administrator and the legislative band. So it implies we're going to talk to the town administrator and select board, town clerk, and so on. And so all these different ones, it implies behind that we're going to be talking to people.
But that, I'm sorry, I don't.
That's okay. No, it's okay.
But that would take, I don't know what the timeline is for that line item?
Well, it's a month or 2 months for each of these in the plan.
I would think we would be taught that those discussions would take place maybe longer than that over the course of this project, I would have thought. But, so it just, I guess I looked at the duration and the select board. I think talking to the select board is one thing. I think talking to some department heads would be a different thing, and I would think it would take more time than it would talking. I thought the select board was pursuant to a recommendation that we connect periodically with the select board about our work and our progress and et cetera. So I have a feeling, I guess it's my sense that communicating with the select board is one thing, communicating with certain town departments about the inner workings of those departments is another thing that would warrant calling out in a project plan.
And I think this is just a high-level project plan. It's a start, and as we get into it, we start learning what our job is. I think it's up to us. I think we need to do that. I agree with you. There's going to be a lot more steps, but I think we need to do that. And this is just intended to outline, kind of give us a flavor for where we're going with this thing and so on.
Kevin, you also mentioned other towns.
Yes.
As the process goes on, I wouldn't be surprised that
it's in here.
we go to Groton, or
Yes.
maybe not the whole group, but send people to a town near our size to get a feedback on how they do things and how well it's being run.
I think someone suggested that in our inaugural meeting, that that be a step we complete. So I'd like to see that as on the project plan. If we could add that, I think that makes sense.
We'll have to figure out where and exactly who specifically, but I totally, for sure. And a lot of that obviously is in the information that they're providing to us as well, as they've done some initial work or some high-level work from other towns to gather some data anyway, not talking to people, but data from other towns. Like in this work they gave us for today, they have that chart that shows.
But I think those things will naturally come about.
Yeah.
We'll see something that it's time we ask somebody else. I don't. It's not something we plan on right now.
Right. But yeah, sure.
So a couple things that I saw on the Collins Center materials, the common features of a charter that I don't see here, specifically identified there was school committee, the equal of all of the items that are listed here, and also the resident participation question also identified in that common features of a charter, that I certainly think those warrant, certainly the resident participation, I think warrants a breakout session or two, as I think it dovetails into their document preparation for legislation that talks about towns facing challenge of low voter turnout, limited public awareness. Then another one, they talk about the lengthy meetings of town meetings with regard to a challenge of an uninformed public. So I just want to say those things with regard to why those things were not identified, given that they were commonly seen in charter discussions.
Anthony or Melvin, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So I'll start with the resident participation thing. So I would say that that's more common in the what we call the city council, the council form of governments, primarily because in the town meeting form of governments, everyone, in theory, although I know participation can be or attendance can be low, in general, everyone has the ability to go to the meeting, has the ability to put things on the warrant, and so everyone has the ability to have something heard, speak to it, and so on and so forth. Whereas in the council form of governments, you're relying on representatives. They don't have to put your item, so to speak, on their agenda, things of that nature. So a lot of the resident participation provisions, and we can definitely talk about them, talk about the ability to maybe overturn a decision of the town council and or call a meeting to discuss an issue that the committee is interested in. So in the town meeting form of governments, the resident participation features are not, I guess there's kind of the assumption that residents can participate more fully than they could in the council. And that's when communities are transitioning from the town meeting to the town council, the resident participation sections are to protect some of those avenues for resident input in the legislative process that they didn't need under the town meeting form. So that's why it's not included here. That doesn't mean we can't talk about it, or even if you want to add something to your section about it. Again, it's about residents being actively involved in the legislative process, where, again, in the town meeting form, you don't necessarily have that same concern as you do in the town council form. In the school committee section, under the work plan, it's covered under the other elected officials. We can call it out as its own section, but here it's just included in the other elected officials section of this charter. Part of the reason it's not sort of called out right now is that you may have a number of elected officials. We haven't done an analysis of your elections yet, but we would sort of go through that whole process as we get to the other elected officials section. So I'll stop there.
Okay, so I'll just throw out, so I assume then in other elected officers would similarly be Park and Recreation,
Yep.
Water Department,
Library,
Water
there's lots of them.
Commissioners. Yeah.
Right, there's lots of them.
Or
I'm
health,
just-
not
I'm just
elected.
Right.
They're not elected.
Oh, right. Well,
But the Park
Right.
and Rec,
but then, yeah, that's a whole nother
Park
discussion,
and
right?
Rec are.
Right.
So
right.
if that's, so that helps
You're
me
right.
understand, and I certainly didn't understand, Anthony. Appreciate your clarifying what that participation angle was. That's not what, when I saw those two words, what you explained is not what I would have anticipated, so I appreciate the clarification.
I think we need to remember that, at least in my view, our charge is to look at this in a macro, not micro. So we're not looking into the Human Services Department to see if there should be one. There is one. Perhaps we will look at some volunteer committees and whether they're still viable, that what we wanted to do is getting done. But getting into each one of the departments, except where it's a financial matter, is probably not where we're going, so.
Yeah, I'd say, I think that differently, specific to, and the aspects of the charter commission, et cetera, the two-page memo that we had, I thought very much in our purview was consideration with regard to election versus appointed officials, et cetera, and in order to get into that area, I think we have to understand and evaluate what's taking place and whether we collectively think it's working and is responsive now and in the future, or whether we think it's worthy of consideration of change.
Well, difference of opinion.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to say, I heard you say what you said.
At
I
a
respect it.
department that's got an appointed head, it's actually working, unless we think that we should go around recommending that some department heads who are now appointed should be elected. I don't think that's what we want to do.
Probably more the other way around, but yeah.
More the other way around.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
I do think, though, that there's governance structure issues that may be historical, I don't know, that may have relevance to our macro work. So I don't know, I tend to think that my thought about talking with some departments was not to get into how they do their business, more about ensuring that a future governance structure worked and would not deter their good work and so forth. So, and I think someone recommended it from the Collins Center. I thought during the presentation that it was suggested that we connect with certain key departments to understand how they function currently within the town.
Yep. Okay.
On the
Go ahead.
appendix,
Yep.
where it showed comparable communities, Littleton is blank.
Yeah. Anthony got that information for me today. Well, most of it. So he's talking about this appendix. It says comparable communities. And it shows Littleton, Brewster, Groton. So the population of Littleton is 10,145. Registered voters, if you're interested in that, 7,580. Quorum for us is not applicable. And what we didn't have is the most interesting one was the number of town meeting members present. You don't happen to know that off the top of your head, do you, Tim? How many people came to our last town meeting? It was just,
The average is maybe 300, I'd say.
okay,
Yeah.
that helps, like even just that,
Yeah.
I would say. So,
Good, thank you.
yeah, but yeah, you're right, that was missing. Okay, so if we're all set, what I would like to do, because I think we're all just trying to feel our way through this, is have them start us, go through the information they gave us, see what their process is as we go through it, and maybe we'll all get a better feel for how this is going to work. Does that make sense for everybody? Everybody ready to dive in?
Sounds good to me.
All right, you good on your end?
Yes. Oh, sorry.
Nope, you're on.
Oh, and I didn't realize my camera is off. And actually, let me just check with Mel real quick. Mel, do you think it makes sense to go through the first memo and then and then do questions and then do the representative town meeting, or should we do both
Yeah.
memos?
Yeah, why don't you do the overview, and then we'll talk about the rep town meeting option.
And let me just, I'm pretty sure I sent them around, but there's two memos. There's the representative town meeting and then there's the overview. Okay, great. So I'm just going to share my screen again.
Print off the representative town meeting. That's okay.
And I want to sort of, I guess, sort of do some level setting here. So Littleton, like many communities, currently does have some legislation around its town meeting. As Mel already alluded to, a lot of aspects of town meeting are defined in state law, but there are some aspects that communities can regulate on their own. So where I like to start with this type of charter creation process is we're going to start by first looking at your current bylaws to see what they currently say. And to the extent that the committee wishes to, it can import some of that language into the proposed charter. And then, as we'll see with Littleton, there are some areas that it does not cover, which, you might find it useful to sort of actually cover some of these things in the charter. So I'm gonna sort of skip this starting section, which sort of lays the groundwork, or sort of starts where we're at, and I'm gonna just go down here to current conditions. And this is the section I'm talking about, which talks about the town bylaws and what's currently covered. And so again, it starts with a citation so that everybody can find it and look up, to see the actual language that they want to. We didn't copy and paste the language in full just because we didn't think that it was necessary. But, of what we found to be your comparable communities in terms of size and form of government, just about all of them have some of the things that you currently have, which is the date and time of the town meeting. One thing that is somewhat unique to Littleton is that you actually specify the time of the meeting. Most communities have just the date, and they leave it up to the administration through the select board to determine what is the best time of day to have it. And that could be for a number of reasons, whether it's weather or some other issue, but that just provides some flexibility. That doesn't mean that you have to do it, but we found that some communities do like that sort of flexibility in terms of the date and time of in that you specify a date, but don't necessarily specify a time for the town meeting. You have what I consider some limited provisions around notice. So you've got that the meeting warrant must be posted at least 7 days before the annual town meeting. 7 days before for the regular town meeting, 14 days before the special town meeting. That is consistent with state law. State law requires a minimum of 7 days for the regular and 14 days for the special. Some communities have made that a little bit longer to give people more notice. And the other thing that is, I wouldn't say unique to Littleton, but we've also seen a number of communities specify additional posting locations. That is to include this town's website. So it's not just the cork board or whatever posting area there might be. And then the last one, you have a sort of a very interesting sort of town meeting procedure. I would say in most of the communities that we reviewed, they actually specify which type of parliamentary procedural rules that they're referring to, whether it's town meeting time or Robert's rules or what have you. Littleton currently just defines the requirements for a 2/3 vote. So it might make sense to flesh that out, and it's great you have your moderator right there with you to sort of talk about how that does or isn't working with the current town meeting. So what are some additional provisions that might make sense for the charter? So the first one is the election and role of the town moderator. Again, it's reflected in state law, but a lot of communities include it in their charter. It wouldn't necessarily, it can go in this town meeting section, but doesn't necessarily have to go there. Oftentimes, there's a separate section for the town moderator to be defined, their election, their terms, and things of that nature. Quorum requirements. So under state law, you don't necessarily have to have quorum requirements. In fact, Littleton doesn't have any right now, but a lot of communities do have a quorum requirement. Usually the numbers are between 30 to 100. I can tell you that some of the concerns around quorum requirements are that if they're too high, it's impossible to create, to have a quorum for a town meeting. And that's something that towns do struggle with in terms of engagement. That's something that we touched on a little bit earlier. So if you add quorum requirements, and we do recommend that, you just give some thought into what the numbers should be for the different types of meetings. We would recommend, and a lot of communities do have a robust warrant preparation timeline. And so what exactly does that mean? That means, when does the select board basically open the warrant to allow them to receive petitions from the public or from town departments or what have you? When do they close it so that they can actually start formalizing the warrant and preparing it for publication? And you set all those dates, or communities usually set those dates in relationship to town meeting. So you might open the warrant about 2 to 3 months prior to town meeting, and you may sort of close it about 2 to 3 weeks before the town meeting starts. One thing I'll just say, I wouldn't say it's an outlier, but some communities allow the warrant to be open all year long, except for that time period where they're closing it for the meeting. That's not necessarily what we consider for best practice, but I'm just giving you the whole scope of what different communities do. We talked about the defining meeting procedures, which is really just expanding on the section with the 2/3 vote. And another thing that we see communities doing is this requirement for the attendance of key town personnel. And so I won't read the language to you, but it's usually something to the extent of department heads and chairs of boards and committees are required to attend the town meeting to report, basically to answer questions from the attendees about sort of any particular issue that they may or may not want to ask about. It also includes sort of like relief valves to say that, they can designate someone to attend in their stead. So sort of before I get into the appendix, and I'm not sort of going to go through the appendix, these are just some general areas to sort of question in terms of key individuals. Like we probably want to have a robust discussion about who participates in the preparation of the warrant. You have the town moderator on your panel, so we would advise you to talk to that person. But you can identify other members that you want to sort of go through these different aspects of the preparation of the warrant and the town meeting. Another just section that I'm just looking at quickly that apparently didn't make it on the memo is a lot of communities specifically define where the town meeting can occur. It's in state law, but they'll define that the town meeting has to be within the geographic borders of the town, or in special circumstances maybe on maybe in an adjacent community. And there's some specific language around what qualifies as an adjacent community, and when they'll allow the town meeting to happen in one reason or another. I'm going to stop rambling to give Mel. Do you want to add anything in there about the memo, about some of these key aspects?
Sure. I would just say that the position of the town moderator, which is an elected official, would probably belong here in the town meeting section as opposed to in other elected officials. My understanding is the town moderator is a 3-year term. In the state law, it could be either 1 or 3. I didn't notice it in the bylaws, which I thought was interesting, that, what the term of the moderator is. But I think that's an area that I see in most charters, just, identifying the position of the town moderator and what is the length of their elected term. And then Anthony already mentioned there might be some issues around the parliamentary procedure. Are you going to use the town meeting time or Robert's rules? Quite often that gets spelled out. The one thing I would say is if you're going to have a charter, you also will have companion bylaws. Anybody who has a charter doesn't get rid of their bylaws. They have the bylaws to complement the charter. And what you've got to be careful of is you don't want to put too many detailed things in the charter, because any changes would have to go through the whole legislative process, presumably again, whereas bylaws are a little easier to approve a change from year to year. On the other hand, you don't want things always changing. So there are some things you want in your charter and other things you want in your bylaws when it comes to this and most sections, frankly.
Great, thank you. I'll turn it back over to the committee. I did just want to add one sort of wrinkle, I guess, for your discussion, just as you guys are mulling this all over, is that particularly in the area of the timing of the town meeting, there are some communities that sort of specify that the town meeting can happen within any time in the 3 months of the spring. Like they'll say, April, May, June. That can be when the spring town meeting is. That is allowable. That's something that they do. It's not something we recommend, only because one of the reasons for the charter is sort of transparency, and we think it's important that members of the community can know when their town meeting is. So again, something you can do. It's not necessarily something that we recommend. Some communities like that flexibility, but again, we'd say that other than the time of day when the meeting happens, that might be that might be too much flexibility and not as useful, particularly for residents that want to sort of, you like, the reason why the annual town meeting is so valuable is that individuals sort of always know when it is, and that's why you get usually your best attendance there versus your special. Another just trend that we're seeing across the state is a trend towards more than one annual town meeting. So a lot of communities have had an ongoing fall special, and we're seeing some communities convert that special into a regular. And having a regular town meeting allows you, there are certain things you can't adopt at a special town meeting that you can do at a regular. So that doesn't get rid of your special town meeting. Someone can still call a special, but you just have 2 annuals so that you can get more business done. And again, that depends on, how much work is happening at the town meetings, and whether it even makes sense to have 2. But that's been a trend as more items have been appearing on warrants. So I'll stop here, and I will sort of open it to questions from the committee.
So, Tim, can I ask you to go through and just give your opinion? Is that putting you on the spot too much to do this offhand? I don't think so, right?
No, I mean,
I would just like to hear your opinion on how this is here, what you think is working, what isn't working, and so on, and all these different items, since you're here.
Yeah, sure,
You want to
sure.
stay at the podium?
No. That's fine. Well, as was mentioned, our section of the bylaws regarding town meeting is pretty brief, and a lot of it is just the where and when, the posting of the warrant, very minimal sort of information. We do put out a town meeting report, which we've done for the past several years, which I think is has been a help. People have said it was to them that we put out the articles and the motions, likely motions in advance, and the finance committee's report on those, and people have been coming into town meeting armed with more information than they used to be, certainly. So that's I think that's a bonus. The only item regarding town meeting procedure is the one requiring the 2/3 vote, and you'll recall that we, in past years, had problems with, especially borrowing articles. They required a 2/3 vote, and by not allowing the moderator to declare a two-thirds majority, it forced us to go to the ballot and checklist for those two-thirds votes. And finally, town meeting said, that's kind of silly. It takes about an hour to do a ballot and checklist, and it became kind of a problem. So they gave the moderator the authority to declare a two-thirds vote without a count, which has been kind of made moot by the introduction of the electronic voting.
Yeah.
I mean, all I have to do is see if the numbers work out. It's a two-thirds vote. It's not
Right.
there's literally no judgment involved. So even that one section we have is not even so useful. I do think it might make sense to add sections to the charter about how the warrant is developed, the roles of the various parties. And I know the select board's been talking about making changes in recent years, particularly with zoning amendments, because they kind of have been coming in at different times in the year, and they wanted to kind of corral them earlier in the process before we got too close to a town meeting. So the board might have some thoughts about how that goes. I think generally, what's been mentioned, the role of the moderator and the town clerk at a town meeting, it's pretty well described in the general laws. The moderator regulates the proceedings of the town meeting, which really, to me, means you don't need to enumerate every one of those procedural situations that he could have to make a call for, that it's more or less implied. And in some ways, I think the less said, the better. I think, as Mel referred to, once you nail it down to specifics, if we say that every voter will have 3 minutes to speak to an article, if we wanted to change it to 2, well, geez, that's a charter change. That's not, we want to be a little more nimble with that, and the bylaws do allow you to do that. But then there's the argument that, do we have to put in every little detail regarding the town meeting, regarding how people address the meeting and the voting procedures and the precedence of the motions that are all part of the parliamentary procedure. We do use town meeting time as the reference for parliamentary procedure that governs our town meeting. We don't refer to that anywhere, and I think it's probably, a time that we did. Coincidentally, the Moderators Association, they've just put out an electronic version of town meeting time, so it's a good time to get that up on the website and take. So
Get what up? I'm sorry.
that reference, like this is the rule book for town meeting.
Okay.
It's been
I
kind of,
see.
it's been something that only town councils and moderators have, so people wonder, what are the rules? Right? It's like a secret.
First time I ever heard that.
Yeah, it's like a secret rule book. So
Okay,
if we can put it on the
buy used cars, right?
website,
Yeah.
people can,
Yeah.
see, which motion trumps which one. And it's almost like, cards, with the hands. That, but I think that would certainly help. I do think we want to be more transparent and expansive, but I don't think we want to hem ourselves in with too many things that are such fine details that we end up painting ourselves in the corner and having to change it too often. Some of the procedure of the meeting, I think, is best left to the moderator, because you can make changes from year to year. And particularly with the introduction of electronic voting. I mean, some communities have large sections on electronic voting in their charter. We've just, adopted that. I don't really see a need to, memorialize that, because we could have a new method of voting in 5 years' time. The moderator can declare, for this meeting, we're going to use electronic voting, and that's all you need. You don't need it to be referenced in the charter or a bylaw. But again, I'm open to suggestion as well. But I generally think that the things that the clerk does at the meeting and that the moderator don't need to be sort of fully fleshed out, or we don't have to get down in the weeds on some of those things if it's not really I mean, if the public wants to see it all, I mean, that's one thing too. I mean, if not being transparent about something leads to, misapprehension of things, then that's probably a good reason to do it. But a lot of it is pretty routine and mundane.
When you instituted the call of the articles, that was something you did just a few years ago.
Right,
That we never had done before.
right.
Was that your call as a moderator?
Well, to introduce it here, I mean, a number of communities have been doing it.
Yeah, but I'm
It was
introducing
something-
it here. Was that your call?
Yeah, well, it was, Charlie was not interested in doing it.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I
That
know.
was not, he was a traditionalist of the
No,
highest
but
order.
that points out.
But that was an innovation, yeah.
It was an innovation, and
Yeah.
it came from the moderator. It wasn't in the charter, it wasn't in the bylaws.
So maybe that should be, that should be spelled out somewhere.
Yeah.
That,
But I thought, yeah, okay.
I just think the electronic voting at town meeting seemed to solve a lot of problems, or make it a lot easier for people to feel more freely in how they vote.
Yeah.
Take some of the pressure off, is it a majority or not, and the calls you have to make. And I don't think, from what I can see, and we haven't gone into it in any depth, though, there's not a whole bunch of changes we have to make, because it's all done with the moderator. And going back to electronic voting too, I think how important that was is that there were so many times at different meetings that if I'm sitting next to you and you're my neighbor and you're going for something, I don't feel that way. I don't want to put my hand up. It takes that all away, so it's open and free now.
That and the fact that half the people left when you had to do ballot and checklist because nobody wanted to hang around for an hour and a half.
Now, could you, as moderator, say we're not going to do electronic voting?
Well, I think technically the moderator, can specify the method of voting. I mean, I don't know why you would, but yeah, I mean, I think,
The only reason I ask is that something that we consider putting in a charter, if we go to a charter?
Well, would it be more in the warrant itself? This is how the voting will happen for this town meeting? Can you decide that in advance and publish that as part
yeah,
of
there's usually a section in the town meeting report where we describe what,
Right.
what's going to be part of the consent agenda and so forth,
so
how the
maybe just
voting's
jump
going to
in if
go.
you
So
have
that is something that, and we've done that the last two times, or the first two times we had the electronic voting, so we felt we ought to say something about that so people have a heads up.
We have some folks with hands up.
Yeah.
Charlotte, I think, and Anthony?
Go ahead, Anthony, because I think you wanted to respond to that particular
Charlotte,
question.
you had your hands up for longer.
No, I'm on a different topic, so you go first and I'll follow you.
So, just on the issue of the rules and of specifying the different voting procedures. So, usually we don't go into a lot of detail about what the moderator can and can't do. It's usually sort of a general provision that the moderator has the authority to manage the meeting. So we wouldn't really recommend sort of the detailed, itemize all of the sort of different types of votes and things the moderator can and can't do. As far as the voting piece, charters, the only voting procedure that charters specify, and I think it's primarily because this is relatively unique to town meeting, is the provision about secret ballot. So in Massachusetts, town meetings have the ability to do what's called a secret ballot. And so if you are inclined to, there's some language that we could provide you about what's generally accepted for secret ballot language. But other than that, you don't really specify the different type of roll call votes or rising type of things in the charter. So just adding that to the committee's discussion.
So one thing that I would just in general, when you think about things like this, like Tim's here, he's been moderator for a long time, town meeting runs well. So we think, well, we don't really need much because he'll just handle it. But the next town moderator could be a problem, right? You don't know. And so I guess that's the balance, right? What needs to be in here to kind of give you things, some control over that.
Get your arms around it.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
It's the balance, yeah.
Well, I'm hard pressed to understand the difference between electronic voting and now that we have it and a secret ballot. So, to me, voters attending the meeting have the ability to communicate their
Right.
their preference. So, Betsy, to your point, I would not be in favor of seeing a town moderator. I'm not saying that you would do this, but to your point of next town meeting, in the future, if somebody wanted to take that offline and go back to a stand up or raise your hands or that sort of thing, I find that I don't think that would be in our best interest in terms of this group conveying for the future, that sort of aspect. That would concern me, if you will.
Yeah, I think.
So how do we
secret-
capture something
Oh, I'm
like?
sorry. No, go ahead. You were waiting.
Oh, sorry.
Charlotte. Yeah.
I had a similar question to you, Betsy. Like, how do we then capture the right level of detail in the charter, which it seems that a broad statement around the town moderator's duties is kind of what's appropriate to put in the charter. How do we craft that so it does capture what we want the town moderator to do without being too prescriptive? Because I think, Anthony, was saying that the town charter doesn't typically lay out the voting type, but it does lay out the high-level duties of the town moderator in order to ensure that we have that level of fidelity, perhaps, to what we want from the town meeting. Is there a way to strike that balance so that we're not getting into the weeds, but we are ensuring a high-performing town moderator role? Exactly the point. If we didn't have Tim, if somebody else was town moderator, how would we do that?
So maybe we can ask our colleagues at Collins to get some information from other towns, because it sounds here like there are towns that do more specifically things, and see what kind of things they've written up and how it looks and feels. Is that an appropriate way to go forward with this? Yes, Anthony?
Madam Chair. So I would say we can definitely send you some language for some different communities. If I were to put it in buckets, so this is outside of the town moderator section, but in the procedure section, there's the identification of, it sounds like you're using town meeting time, so we can plug that in. And also it would say, pursuant to bylaws in the charter. It's a whole, it just says the bylaws, the charters in town meeting time. So that provides some flexibility, because I think the moderator said this. You don't want to be too inflexible specifically about your town meeting rules.
I agree.
But to the extent that the committee wants to be different from town meeting time, you can sort of specify an ordinance, a bylaw, or give the town moderator that discretion. And then the town moderator section, the section particularly talking about the moderator, it's generally just that this person runs the meeting, and obviously there's some more flowery language around that. And this is a question for you, the committee. Does the moderator appoint the finance committee? Because that's the other place where usually the moderator has some authority, and if they do, then we would put that in that section, and if not, we would leave that alone. So I sort of put that to the committee.
Yeah, Littleton's unique as far as I know, that there are 7 members of the finance committee, and the moderator appoints 1 member. The select board appoints 2, the school committee appoints 2, light and water, and the board of assessors. So there's kind of a political, calculation was made at some point in the past that this was the fairest way to do it. So I think you'd want to refer to that, certainly, because that is a unique way of doing it, I think.
That would come on. To me, that's like under the finance committee section, unless you just say that.
Yeah,
right?
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with town meeting.
Let's see if I could. A lot of the items are under the heading of additional provisions for consideration with regard to establishing formal warrant preparation timeline and the whole process that continues on from there. I kind of feel that if we had what are our existing practices that may not be reflected in any document, but rather let's just get those on a piece of paper before us and distribute them, we might find a way to come to agreement with regard to looks pretty good, or what about this, what about that?
Yep.
I'll just throw that out as an idea to consider. I also heard earlier, and I would agree with the concept that because the annual meeting date gets most people to attend because it's fixed, I find myself that I would recommend putting in the 2 annual meeting concept and fixing it with regard to a date specific so that we'd have the opportunity to have residents know, I don't want to be away that week, that we would then have a process communicated with the select board and the town administrator or future town manager, should we go that way, with regard to driving us towards with all the required deadlines and timing of opening a warrant and closing a warrant in advance of publication, et cetera. So I just throw that out where I see myself leaning towards, I like the certainty, and if that has led, in others' opinion, to bring more people to the room than less, then I find that desirable with regard to getting the second meeting, because it seems like we have so many things in the special town meeting, or we're typically at 30 plus before you get into the consent agenda, knocking them down, that I find myself, it seems to me that Littleton's work product, if you will, brought together for town meetings requires 2 meetings consistently. I find it hard to believe that we're going to find ourselves with a one annual meeting per year.
Jim?
Yeah, I heard Anthony mention that earlier, and I was surprised to hear that, because what I believe, and what most moderators would tell you, is that there's one annual meeting and everything else is a special. That's the way we've always done it, and I mean, it's kind of inherent in the name, annual meeting, but if that's changing, that, I suppose that's fine.
What's the nuance, so for most of us, what's the nuance? In the fall, technically, it's a special town meeting, it's not an annual. So from a practical standpoint, what's the difference?
Well, only because it's not the annual. I mean,
Are there certain things that you can't do under?
Yeah, you're resolving maybe shortfalls in the budget, or adjusting things as far as that goes.
We've had some big articles in the fall town. I mean, the fall has gotten to be a big...
It has gotten a little, that kind of started under Keith, to be honest. We kind of grew to 2 large agendas. But realistically, our annual meeting's always been, it was the first Monday in May. We adjusted that to be the first week in May to give the staff a better, opportunity to prepare for the meeting and not have to work Sunday to be ready for a Monday meeting. There's been a fall special for as long as I can remember, and the logic is always, well, geez, September's too soon to have it because everybody's getting back in the swing of things, vacations and school and so forth. November's kind of late because we're going to have the tax classification hearing. We're going to try to set a tax rate and get the Christmas, the bills out before Christmas. So we usually hone in on October as being like, the target for the special town meeting. So we almost do, with some regularity, have a May and an October town meeting.
So it's the biannual town meeting.
No, exactly. I don't think.
So, is there any benefit administratively for you, Tim, to call it a regular second meeting versus a special meeting? Would that alleviate any administrative pressure? Would that make it more efficient, or is it just
the warrant belongs to the select board, so they can call it what they will. I'm just saying, my understanding was always that there's only one annual, and it may just be semantics, because we've always had the 2 meetings.
Okay, so Gary Wilson from our select board is here, and you want to speak to this, Gary?
I apologize, I had a meeting before.
No, that's great.
Over here, but I guess I would say that the problem, or a challenge of making 2 annuals is you're not going to cancel an annual meeting, ever. We would never cancel a May meeting, where we could theoretically not have the special if we didn't need it. Right, because we always have to do the budget, have to do the annual budget in May, everything has to be done. So that will always have the warrant, at least those articles. Right. But theoretically, that late October, first week of November meeting, we wouldn't always need. Right. And maybe that's something we can look at a little deeper, is why are we putting things off? Is it just administratively we've begun to lean on this more than we should? Those are the, I don't know.
And maybe the world's changed and things are bigger. You
Yeah.
can't always wait a year to do something, so.
So I don't think this is a question we're going to resolve tonight. I think I like to look at things in terms of alternatives. So there's at least two alternatives here. There's having one annual meeting, there's having two annual meetings. And there's positives and negatives associated with each. I think what we ought to do is, if that's a legitimate question, we ought to summarize what are the advantages of having one annual meeting and the opposite of advantages, and the advantages and disadvantages of having two annual meetings. I thought that Anthony mentioned that some towns are moving to two because, and I forget what it was, Anthony. But anyways, I have a more fundamental question. I'm looking at the charge for this committee, and I read that right now Littleton does not have a charter. Is that correct?
Correct.
A July 2024 government structure review conducted by the Massachusetts Department of Revenue Division of Local Services recommended to the Select Board that we initiate a process to consider developing a town charter. Is that a question we should be discussing, whether, first and foremost, so that we can know whether we're building a charter and then bylaws? And if yes, if we're doing both, what goes in a charter and what goes in bylaws?
I'll admit I thought that was a given, but I'm open to the discussion. I think we might be able to address it rather quickly. It's my 2 cents.
I would tend to agree that. Yep, go ahead.
Sorry, I would say from the previous meeting and reading the documents, I felt like we were definitely moving in that direction. And maybe just to give as an example, I jotted down an action item for this process. I think it was mentioned earlier that it would be helpful, for instance, to list out the existing practices for the town meeting, determine which of those existing practices we feel like are adequately captured in bylaws, which we would want to put into the charter, and which we might want to just have as a sort of, for want of a better word, a sort of meeting SOP that sits outside of either one of those. But that's the way I've been kind of making my notes mentally to say, when we're discussing these things, where do these various decisions fit? And where are they codified, if at all, within the documentation for Littleton?
Yep. I was thinking along the same line, Charlotte.
We'll
'cause
have a charter.
Right. We were having this discussion about one or two, or what do we call them, and like that's not broken. I mean, we need to discuss it, but how much time do we want to spend on that? Somehow we need to go through these items and prioritize them and figure out where we're going to spend the time, because some of it, we want to talk about it, but how much time do you want to spend on something that we don't feel like, well, that's not a problem here? Not that you don't want to ignore it, because you still want to say, can we do better? Do we want them documented or not? But there might be some other things that you really need to spend a lot of time on and delve into, and we want to make sure that we're using our time wisely on the right topics. I'm not sure how we do that. If Anthony and Melvin have some suggestions on how we go through the list.
Chime in my mind,
Yes.
the charter are the principles and the things
Right.
that stand the test of time,
Yeah.
relatively speaking, more than a year, more than 5.
Yeah.
And then everything else is procedural and can be documented somewhere else. But what are the principles? What are the things that we want to see happen in town meeting? And I would just caution all of us, before we say it's not a problem, without talking to the
Yeah.
stakeholders,
Oh, yeah,
maybe there
that's true,
are things
Yeah,
that
that's
people
fair.
feel are a challenge
Yeah.
that we should
Right.
dig into.
But to
So I
go to
just wanted to
Kevin's,
cushion it with
should
that.
should we get into the issue of, do we all see ourselves headed down this path towards charter, et cetera? And if that's the case, then the framework that Charlotte just identified, and Betsy, you seem to agree as well, then we could adopt such a framework with regard to our future discussions with regard to, okay, as we move through the proposed plan and have specifics, just briefly, quick, say, I think this is over here versus over there. Should we agree that we
Yeah.
want to go down this path?
Process versus policy or principle, and
Could-
just farm it out.
I was thinking that it probably was the sense of this committee that we would have a charter. That seems to be the trend in governance structures. I was thinking that probably if that was our sense, we should memorialize that sense, because we don't do anything here, we're only recommending. And that if it was our sense to go with a charter, I was wondering if we would then ask and I don't know if it falls within your purview or not, Collins Center, to perhaps begin drafting the fundamentals of a charter, including key decision points that we need to make about whether this goes in a charter or it goes into bylaws, or what do you want to do with this? So I was just thinking of putting a stake in the ground. Yes, it is our sense as a committee to move to a charter that would be a high-level set of principles for governance, not the details, not the but a high-level charter. And if that was our sense, Collins Center, would that be within your purview to take a shot or give us templates or samples?
So I think the short answer is yes. That is sort of what we're trying to do here. So the work plan is sort of those sort of key elements that we see in most charters. Again, like I said at the beginning, sort of some communities have maybe an extra article or some that we would say is a little bit different, or some don't have all. But again, what you've got in the work plan is sort of the backbone of every charter. And then our process has been that at each meeting, we go through, we have the meeting, and we give you sort of what you're doing now and what a lot of other communities are doing, as well as the best practices, so that you can start to dig into these questions. And I actually think the discussion you're having now about, even if it's about two annual meetings, that's really the discussion that we want to prompt to think about if this is the direction the community wants to go in. And then we can draft language. Now, we can sort of drop some language on you from other communities, and we'll do that if you want. I guess our experience has been that can be somewhat overwhelming for members to sort of just see a bunch of charter language without the context of the meetings and the interviews with administrative officials. Mel, I don't know if you want to add anything there. But I mean, the short answer to your question is yes.
I think.
So maybe a follow-up to that, Anthony, is
go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, maybe once we've had this kind of discussion, I am thinking it could be helpful as a second step. So each of these high-level topics typically has one or two meetings associated with them. For the second meeting, or maybe for the first, we could have that draft charter language, but really acknowledge that it is a straw man, that it is something for us to react to and for something for us to kind of wrap our heads around. It is not going to be what we necessarily want to propose, and almost intentionally maybe have some things in it that we don't want to propose. But I wonder if that might help to galvanize a little bit of our thinking So we have the first step, we have the memo, we kind of talk about some of the big topics. At the second meeting, perhaps we have a straw man of the language that might then be included, and that gives us something to kind of react to. Does that sound like something you might?
No, that's I guess, because we've done this in different ways, I guess I'm curious from the committee. I think that there's really two approaches to it. One, so you have your sort of comparator communities, and we can add or subtract from there based on, the thoughts of the committee. What we can do is we can pull out the language, we're on the town meeting section, so we can pull out the town meeting language and just put that in front of you for each community, and we can circulate that really after this meeting. Or we can take what we've currently got for notes from the discussion, and we can draw up the language sort of based on the direction that the sort of conversation is going, and we put that in front of you. I guess I'm curious, or we can do both. So, it's not really an either or. I guess I'm curious, does the committee have a preference?
I like option B, kind of based on what the discussion is, draft the language.
We need to have copies of the relevant bylaws that pertain to each one of the subjects in our work plan. Since we don't have a charter, even if we did, we don't have a copy of it, so we don't know what it even looked like. So I find it difficult to deal with anything here unless I have what we currently have, and I have to be able to look at it. And then we can decide what's procedural and what's the high level.
I agree with you, and I went through and I went on the website today and actually looked at the bylaws, because here it's like it talks very high level about what they are, and so I want to see what the detailed wording is. Well, there isn't a lot of detailed wording. This is about it in this case, but I agree with you that it would be helpful every time to have a copy. What are the bylaws specifically, and see the actual wording so we know that something didn't get glossed over or whatever.
I can go online and I can go into the bylaws.
Yeah?
But I'm not sure that I don't miss something.
Well, but they reference the ones here of which ones they were in this case. But, yeah. But, so, I mean, my only, with this, again, we're just going through this the first time, right? So kind of my unease, that's not the right word, but with having wording drafted from what we discussed tonight, is I feel like we kind of need to get, I mean, is it just us just talking about this, or do we still feel like we want to talk to more people before we get to that point? And I don't know where everybody else is.
Personally, I think
Wow.
a lot of what we've discussed tonight is more or less perfunctory, and that I'd look towards documenting what's working today in order to see it in black and white, and from that engage ourselves in, brief discussion with regard to whatever we have in front of us. Do we agree? Do we disagree? And not necessarily discuss each one, rather just identify we're good on all of this and we want a discussion, and then determine how much time we want to put for discussion points. But I think much of this, a lot of it's, this part is, I suspect we're going to find ourselves agreeing to it. We just need to follow their recommendation with regard to it. Seems a bit brief, so let's put in a little bit more specificity into it and go from there.
Which is, I think, is why they suggested we do this section first, right? Because they knew that too.
It's fine. Yeah, I just like to.
Yeah, no, I agree. So what do you want? You want to go down and talk about our current bylaws, 41, 1, 2, 3, what they say is in here now, and 4, and then they have some provisions for considerations. We don't have to talk about 20 minutes on everything, because I don't want to be here all night. But if we have something relevant, something we really want to say, well, that's important. I mean, I don't know what the process was. You went through this before, Joe, so
My
it was very
process is
different.
entirely different.
Okay.
I agree with, we should have something in front of us, what you have right there. I didn't bring my copy, but if we go through every specific thing that's there and talk about it's working, it's not working, then we have it in black and white and make a recommendation from there. Other than, if we don't do that, then we're going to be talking just like we are now and jumping from one
circle,
aspect
right.
of town meeting to the other and
Right.
whatever.
Right. Okay. We just do it then? And get some sense, and then they can draft some wording, and then again, that's just the start. And then from that, we have that wording now as we're out talking to people, and people stop us at the grocery store and other places. You got something to talk about, this is where we are, and.
Well, I would suggest that, once again, we
Yeah.
read through this and in our next meeting, say we're talking about the date and time of town meeting.
Yeah.
Do we approve of how it's being run right now, or does it need to be changed? And then move on.
So I'd say you're saying not go through the current set of bylaws, rather come up with a new document that we introduce at the next meeting in order to make that determination.
I kind
Or
of
are
like,
you saying to go through this document?
I'm just saying, we have something black and white,
Oh, I agree with that. I'm there.
but take this and go through it and give our viewpoints on what's there and what works and what doesn't work, and then we can move on.
And in this
Or
case, what
elements-
you have
I'm sorry.
really is the bylaws. There really isn't any more meat to
Right.
it than what's in front of you. I looked
Yeah.
today.
I was going to say, or what's missing, or too
Right.
precise, like the 7 p.m. start time. Is
Right,
that
exactly.
necessary?
But that's the discussion we need to have.
Exactly.
Charlotte?
And would it be, yeah, I'm just wondering then if we want to divvy up some of those external conversations, because it sounds like in order to be able to react to what's working and what's not, we would want some of those other key people to weigh in, especially it seems to me asking, members of the select board or the finance committee or the town clerk what challenges exist, or are there any aspects of the process that are unclear between now and the next meeting? Do we want to say, okay, certain people actually engage those individuals, ask those questions, and come back with the key inputs? And then one that I was going to add to that, and I'm not sure how this is handled elsewhere, but do we also ask the community that? Sort of, how do you get the typical kind of residents' feedback on whether they think the town meeting works or not? Is there a way that we can engage before that public hearing process I'm sure that can probably get a little messy, but we're asking ourselves, are there aspects of this town meeting process that work and don't, and what works and what doesn't work, and we're asking town officials what works and doesn't work. At what point do we also want to get that feedback from the community?
There's other
Before we
questions
make any
on the
decisions.
table here than town meeting, right? There's big questions, I believe, town manager versus town administrator.
Yeah, that's coming up
It's just-
later, though.
Yeah, just for the agenda for tonight, though.
For this particular one,
But
I
I think
was
if we
wondering,
talk to stakeholders every single time for everything, they're gonna get sick of talking to us, and we could probably combine a lot of the questions into one session. So if we're gonna talk about town meeting and town administrator and we could probably bundle those conversations. I don't know that we're far enough along at this stage.
But at the same time, I
Outreach to
think
some
it
of
might
them?
be worthwhile, maybe for our next meeting, to ask the town administrator to come in for 10 minutes, and the town clerk to come in for 10 minutes and do it that way.
I agree.
That way, and we have our town moderator here, so we have the key people right here, so we can move on with this section. I wouldn't want to wait and have a whole bunch of topics one night, and
So I'm okay with that process, but I'll say that I doubt that you folks know from a Charlotte's perspective of public participation. I came in because I have great concerns with regard to the town meeting process. So I know I could take up more than 10 minutes easily with regard to identifying my concerns, and yet I recognize I'm just one member on a 9-person group here, and I'm just one out of 10,185. So I don't want to filibuster, but I think we should be sharing some or garnering perspectives that we have as we're existing to then determine whether I'm isolated and way out in left field, or is there commonality with regard to concerns?
So is it easier, though? I mean, the bottom line is you get something, either we go through, we spend some time tonight and go through these things, our points. I mean, this is a kind of a broad brush of people from town, certainly not everybody, but the idea is with all the different representatives, you have some feel for what's out there and you got to talk to people. But so we put something together, and now you've got something in writing, and now people can, we can argue about it. Other people can look at it, and then they got something to shoot at, because otherwise you just keep having these conversations going around in circles. You put something in writing and say yes, no, and be,
I'm for that.
Okay. So why don't you want to proceed? Let's just talk about these 1 through 4, and then we're going to talk about these additional provisions. We'll keep it as briefly as we can. Anything specific that we would think we ought to be addressed. These guys are going to help us get something documented, so we have something next time to specifically go through and look at, and then we have something, again, as we go about our daily lives, we talk to people and we know people, that'll be part of the informal process. And then I do think that having some specific speakers for next time, having them in so we all get the same information there as well.
Yep.
That sound good? All right, let's do it. So, 41-1, again, talks about the first Monday in May at 7 o'clock. Tim, do you have a strong opinion about the 7 PM, whether that should be in there or not?
No, it's normally done that way because there's a special town meeting that evening, which starts at 7:30, but again, that's, there doesn't have to be a special, it can all be on the annual warrant.
Okay, and also, but from a charter standpoint, it doesn't need to say 7 o'clock. That's really what we're getting down to, right?
I'd say that should not be in the
Right, it should
charter.
not be in there. So that's the kind of thing we can go after. Right.
is it always the first Monday or first week?
It's the first week
Well,
now.
it's been changed, they have a weekday during the first week. So they wanted to give themselves an additional day or two. So it usually is a Tuesday or a Wednesday now, because nobody wants to have a town meeting on a Thursday or a Friday before the town election, right? So you're
So why
really-
don't we memorialize, I think that's well stated and well reasoned. You don't want it on a Monday, you don't want it a Thursday or Friday. How difficult is for us to determine, so let's just put a stake in the ground and say it's a Tuesday or a Wednesday, or say one of those two, which I'd be fine with either, but.
Question, Tim, what comes first? The election comes first. Isn't it the first?
It used to.
Not anymore. right.
They changed that at a town
Yeah, it
meeting.
used to work that way, but it got changed.
So that you got the people sitting at the table who made all the work, rather than somebody new who just got elected and didn't do work on the warrants, right?
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I have it completely backwards
Yeah,
in
well,
my
then
mind.
they switched it,
Just-
yeah.
yeah, they changed it,
So right now, the town meeting is first and then the election. Right, that,
yeah.
So if we decided to make it the first Tuesday in the month of May, then we could eliminate the weekday during the week of and just say it's Tuesday.
But it's kind
Yes.
of an awkward way to phrase it, isn't it? Yeah.
Well,
they
yeah,
can
but it
help
was
us
the only
with-
way to
they can
really
help us
do
with
it.
the language.
I know, yeah.
Right,
But-
right, okay, that's right, okay, so Rob had a good point, just help us with the language, how the other towns do it, how they word it. I mean, I don't know, personally, I'm okay with giving them the flexibility of saying sometime during that week, but if other people think it, and if best practice is you say it's always gonna be on Tuesday, then let's put something down, and then we'll figure it out later how we wanna leave it.
I recommend we go for Tuesday. We-
So when it says,
Just as a
Anthony and
point
Melvin,
of
where it
clarity-
says here that the other places specific, establish a specific date, does that really mean the date of the month, or does that mean a day of the week?
And Mel will chime in here, but from what I most often see is it'll be really exactly what you said, the first Tuesday, the first
Okay.
Thursday, the
All right.
first or second Saturday of that month.
That makes more sense.
Mel, I don't know if you want to add anything there, if you see something.
No, I mean, there are some communities in the charter who don't specify a specific date. They say, in the first, 3 weeks of May or something, they give a range. But, for your community, if you're used to having a date that's time certain, date certain, then we would probably recommend putting it in the charter.
Okay. Anybody else have anything specific they want to say about that? Okay. Let's go to 41-2.
Betsy,
Yep, sure,
sorry,
Charlotte,
just
yep.
a clarification here, so is the intention here to say that we're making a decision as to whether or not the charter should specify this, or is the decision what exactly the charter is specifying? Because I feel like if it's the latter, we may end up spending quite a bit of time deliberating the specifics versus making the decision in or out.
I don't think we're making
and
decisions
also
at this point, it's
just
just
to help
getting
me with
something
my
on
notes
paper.
as well.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Okay.
From my standpoint, we're not making
Okay.
any decisions, this is just
Right.
getting something on paper, so that now next time we can say,
React to it.
we can
yeah.
have a specific,
Gotcha.
specific
Okay.
discussion, yes or no? Up or down, okay?
Thank you.
All right, great.
Make sure that's in the minutes, thanks.
All right, 41-2 talks about the warrant, and again, we can get more specifics, but that, a lot of that is state law, I understand, and it is what it is.
Those are the minimum
The
posting
minimum.
requirements for special and an annual. There was a reference earlier by someone that it doesn't mention the town website. We certainly, it ought to be, it is posted on the town website, but it's not referred to anywhere. But
So we could add that, because
yeah,
times have changed, and so let's just.
And again, you
let's
could
just
also
add that.
say, does that go in the charter, or is that on bylaw someplace, but yeah. The website may not be, but yes. So, all right, so that's that one. 41-3 requires the meeting report. And this happens, and obviously we do send out the report. While this provision is not commonly found, some communities have adopted similar requirements. All right, so we have that already. So anybody want anything that they have to say pro or against that, or just, we can go on to the next one then?
Is this
41-3.
question, it says at least 14 days, but the one before says at least 7 days. Does that matter? Should they both be 14 or 7? 41-2 and 41-3?
One is posted and one's mailing the report out,
Okay.
posting the warrant, I think, is the first.
But I'm just saying, if you're mailing it, that implies it's complete.
Sometimes, though, the mailing has all to be determined, or it's not
Okay.
completely finalized or something yet, right, Tim?
right,
Right.
right,
Okay.
right. And it's always going to get out 2 weeks, 14 days in advance, even if the notice is 7 days. So I don't think it's shortchanging anyone. Right.
I think 14 days is important. My personal mail is that it's getting longer and longer to get from point A to point B, and I suspect the future is going to have that as well. Hence, I think 14 days is a reasonable period of time to put in the document to establish that as a minimum.
Right. But I'm saying, should it also be posted 14 days? I mean, if we have it, why not post it?
If there's, maybe that's a question we ask for the TA with regard to, can you administratively, you should be able to, but do you have only so few hands that you have to deal with this versus that? I don't know, but I'd be open to that if he were to say he needs it. If not, then put both, to your point.
Okay, so that's a good discussion point, and we can talk to different people when they come next time too on that one. It seems to me sometimes there are draft or there are partial versions. Are those not get posted sometimes now? Warrant when it's not completely done?
Well, they just at the last select board meeting, they just reviewed the potential articles and the sequencing of them, and then they just said, no, we're not even going to present that sequence. We're going to bring it up at the 24th meeting of the select board. So it's, you've got opportunities within the select board process, I would say, in order to see what's coming.
It's public is all out there,
They
right?
generally don't post it until it's ready.
Right,
But
okay.
if it's ready before, 7 days
Right.
before the annual, they'll post it 2 weeks,
Right.
whenever it's.
Okay, let's talk about 41.4. The use of 2/3 vote requirements for town meeting. And so this is specifically the counting, if it's 2/3, like how we count it, and that's kind of moot now with the electronic voting? That what that refers to?
Right. If, I'm trying to think of a 2/3 vote. I mean, we'd obviously use electronic voting for, any kind of a borrowing, anything that statutorily required the 2/3. Yeah, I think, I can't see that coming into play at any point, because I'm not going to declare a vote without the count, because taking the count is so easy now.
Right.
Why not?
So the question on this is almost, does it even need to be there?
No, I think that could be eliminated from the bylaws, but again, that would have to be at a town meeting. It certainly, I don't think, it's a procedural issue, it wouldn't have to be mentioned.
Wouldn't have to be in the charter.
Charter, right.
If I could, Tim, help me at the last town, special or town, I forget which, somebody raised a point from the audience with regard to removing something from the proposed consent agenda out of concern that it may shift the vote, and you responded something to the effect of, yes, that's a good point, and so let's take that one out of the proposed consent. So I don't understand the difference between, is it a simple majority for the consent agenda as opposed to a 2/3? Because there was some dialogue that you were engaged in that I don't recall the specifics.
Well, depending on what's on the consent agenda, and I think there was the unpaid bills article, which requires you either an 8/10 or a 9/10.
There's some
funny.
that 9/10, just a majority, 2/3.
So that's why I'm just trying to understand
Yeah.
this
That raises
aspect of the new
That
ones.
raises the level of the entire vote to 9/10. So I think that if I recall correctly, we removed the 9/10 article from the consent agenda so that the whole thing could pass on a majority vote,
That sounds right.
Yeah.
and then do the 9/10 vote separately.
Right.
Usually it's unanimous or near unanimous. That's why they're on the consent agenda, because they're not.
So that's all within the concept of a broad empowerment of the town moderator to differentiate those things on the fly as you need to in response to public
Yeah, that's-
participation
that's,
in your review.
That's all in the general laws, really. It doesn't have to be in a town bylaw.
Okay. I'm good, thank you.
Okay. Okay,
But we still want a section on that, or we want to at least review what the language would look like in the charter that reflects that. Is that right? Because the suggestion was that the committee should consider a more robust version of this section in the charter. So
well, let's
we
go
still
down to,
wanna
let's
see
go down
some
to additional
language to think
provisions.
about.
Maybe that's more where we get into that.
Yeah, maybe a general, a section on how voting is done at town meeting rather than this specific instance of a 2/3 vote. I think that might have been what Anthony was referring to. I know other towns do that, they say electronic voting will be used if available, but
Right, okay.
hand count or voice votes that are possible, it kind of goes through what's possible.
If I may,
Yes, please.
just based on the conversation, what it sounds like is, and again, feel free to shoot me down, but I guess what I'm hearing is, there's an interest in removing the 2/3 vote requirement from this current provision and perhaps replacing it with the language about that you do use town meeting time and something like that. Is that where the committee's going? Because this is kind of the section where that type of language would go.
Yeah, I think that's part of it, and then there was a thought of maybe a section that generally speaks to how voting is conducted at town meeting, and how, the electronic voting is used now, but the town will use the most current technology.
We can add that in this section, yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Could we refer generically to secret ballot and not refer to the particular means of achieving secret ballot, or would that be? Who knows, maybe electronic voting will be gone in 5 years.
Yeah, and
It'll be telepathic.
To be honest, I don't think that qualifies as a secret ballot, because I think if someone were to do a public records request, I think you could drill down to who had clicker number 18 and how they voted all night long. But be that as it may, I think a reference to a secret ballot is a more traditional ballot checklist. And that's what they mean when they say a secret ballot, that you get to, put it in the box and no one knows. Yeah. And I don't think we
Electronic
want that
voting is
anymore.
much more secret than the ballot and
Right,
checklist.
right.
Since you have a
maybe-
red no and a blue yes.
Well, for the person who's standing picking the things, yeah,
All
right,
that
right,
secret,
right.
Yeah,
Right.
better than it was, yeah.
So I think part of the other discussion that I was, at least in my mind, Anthony was going through was, some help with, does this go in the charter or is this a bylaw? Right now, this is a bylaw, so that can stay in the bylaws anyway.
Yeah.
But what is appropriate to be in a charter regarding?
If we're talking about just this procedural rule section, what would appear in the charter is I do see rules on the secret ballot, and we can put something together and put it towards the committee to see if like you said, you want to see it, so you can see it and see if you like that.
Yeah.
The language about using town meeting time, and we can include that in the proposed
What do you mean when you
language as
say
well.
that,
So-
using town meeting time? What do you mean?
Town meeting time.
That's the standard
Oh,
reference.
you mean when you get 3 minutes to stand up there and talk?
No,
No, town meeting time is
it's
a.
like
is a-
Robert's rules, only it's called time meeting time,
Oh,
It's a publication.
sorry.
procedure book.
It's
didn't know that
it's akin to Robert's Rules.
You never
I
heard of
see,
it.
I never have.
No, I didn't either.
Okay, I see it in here now in quotes. I got it. Sorry. Okay. So you want to, let's go down here and talk about some additional provisions, some other considerations that they're putting out for us that we want to think about.
Go for it.
Okay, clarifying the election and the role of town moderator. So again, here, I think we'd like to see some wording from some other towns maybe to see what kind of things they include. Agree? Anybody else have any specific thing they want to address?
Betsy, if I could.
Yeah?
I was curious that the bylaws don't appear to say what the term of the town moderator is. And Tim, did I miss something, or, and if, I would think in a charter you would want to express, is it a year or is it a 3-year term?
Right. It only changed maybe 2-3 years ago, and I recall it was a town meeting vote to change the term, but you're correct, I don't see it referred to anywhere. So we certainly would want to put that in the charter.
Yeah. But right now, we're at 3, correct?
3 years, yeah. Yeah.
So thank you for that suggestion, Melvin. That's good. All right, quorum requirements. This is kind of an interesting discussion, right?
Yeah. That's exactly.
You have an opinion on that one, Tim?
Well, we don't have a quorum requirement, and, I've worked in other communities where, the quorum was different numbers, and it became inconvenient at times. I mean, a lot of town meetings are not terribly well attended, and people will be on their cell phones calling their buddies to, get down here and, and we need to get this vote through. I don't see that well, you need the quorum to start the meeting, but another problem on the flip side is you need to maintain the quorum late in the evening when, the school vote happens and, 80% of the people walk out.
Right.
Someone could question the existence of a quorum, and then you're kind of dead in the water for the rest of that meeting. If no one questions it, you can continue.
You're right.
But, so in some ways, having the zero quorum, if you will, has worked out. I think generally, at the end of the evening, you're talking about 180, 200 stalwarts that are going to be there no matter what. And they always want to finish. They don't want to come back another night. They want to keep going.
So on that basis, I would recommend that we don't institute a quorum requirement.
So then would we say that specifically there is no quorum requirement, or just leave it empty?
By its
Not even-
absence,
not
it
even-
doesn't, by its absence,
By
it
its
doesn't
absence?
exist.
Okay, I'm okay with that.
But
I agree. I mean,
I agree too.
okay. Establishing formal warrant preparation timeline.
again, I would propose the select board announces the warrant is open. They announce at that time when the warrant is going to be closed. I just ask somebody to document what our time periods are right now for the respective special town meeting and the annual meeting, and so we have it in black and white, can look at it and see if it's suitable to,
I think that document exists, because I know and maybe some of the
It
finance
seems
committee
to me
members
like
have
it
seen
does,
it.
too, so we have to get,
That we, for every meeting, that the assistant TA kind of is in charge with putting that together. That may be there,
so,
but,
no, let's
If
just
you
get
wanna
it.
require it.
They're using it.
no, you'd want to, might as well be known by everyone what the timeline is.
well, some people seem to know. Some people are really in the know, are really involved with that stuff, and they always seem to know exactly, oh, this is happening then, now. So it comes from someplace, but let's get that. So I'll ask somebody to get that and see what we have that's formal, documented.
Madam
anyway.
Chair,
Yes.
what we can do is we can put, like you said, sort of some star language in, with just sort of what that language generally is about the timeline.
Okay.
But I'm assuming that at some point in this meeting, you're going to talk about who you want to have come speak to you at your next meeting.
Yes.
And then you might want to flesh out that timeline. So we can put something together with the acknowledgement that you'll hear some on-the-ground information from staff about what those different numbers should
Right.
actually be.
Excellent, thank you. All right. Clear guidelines for the select board and other officials responsible for drafting, reviewing, and approving the warrant articles.
It's kind of the same.
Is it kind of goes along the same, I'd say? Or-
And that strikes me as that would not be in a charter, that would be subject to modification if they come up with a better way to.
That's more operational, yeah.
Okay. All right, that's good, too. I like that, too. Okay. Define special meeting procedures in the charter.
Is that strictly the element of a citizen petition with 200 signatures, et cetera? I've seen it in some of the documents. Is that where this is going to, or is this some
board.
other?
Yeah, so the board calling it on their own motion, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are two ways of having a special, you're right, so maybe Anthony or Mel knows,
So they could put that together as to what are the
Read that
common.
someplace. Is
common-
that not in
yeah,
our
it's been-
bylaws now?
It's been in here somewhere.
It
Read it
has to be.
someplace. Maybe that's just the law. Huh?
But maybe somebody could
General
just
laws,
draft how the select board would go about calling a special town meeting and how a citizen can, go about.
yeah.
Forcing the select
certifying
board's
the
hand.
signatures, yeah.
All right, you up on that, Anthony? You hear all that?
Yes, so
Okay.
I guess what I got in my notes is draft sample language for the special town meeting, which you guys are right on track. It's usually around the number for a citizen's warrant to call the special, and just writing out the select board has the authority to call one, based on certain timelines.
All right, excellent. All right, and then we talk about attendance here. I guess we don't have anything about that now, right? It's just kind of
No.
nothing documented.
There's no quorum, so.
Well, it's different
Is that
than
what it
quorum.
Attendance of the department heads.
Dependent on
Oh, I'm
what
sorry.
department heads, yeah, sorry.
Informally, I think that happens.
Right.
Most of the time. It was a requirement when I was in Framingham, the division heads absolutely had to be there. But,
Yeah, I don't think we formalized it here. I think it's just understood that if you've got, your department has an issue other than your budget
Right.
on the warrant, you've got to be there to defend.
That's right.
Yeah.
Roland used to hang in until they voted the revolving funds through. It was like always like Article 4, and then he was like, hit it out.
But
So I
is
guess
that-
we do want to see though what it would look like if that language was in the charter to say who should attend, to formalize that.
In my opinion, anyone with business on the warrant, should be there. And those are the people you'd want to be there. You wouldn't want to mandate every department
Oh, right, I
has to
agree.
be there if they have no business
Right.
in front of the town meeting. So maybe there's a way of saying
Perhaps
that.
saying that whoever's sponsoring the article specifically should have representation, and then the different board or committee can make about for who's going to represent them at that
Who's gonna
meeting and
speak to it, yeah.
May
designate
not
it.
be sponsor, may not be the right word, because it
Yeah,
could be something that's.
Whatever the
but-
right phrasing is,
Right.
but not to mandate it, but only if you
The
have
DPW
something. that's-
director should be there,
Yeah.
talk about
Expected.
if
If
there's
it's
a question
actionable.
on snow and ice or the
Yeah.
budget or whatever,
Yeah.
they should be there for that.
And if not, this is the process for getting an exception for whatever, having somebody else represent you if you can't for some reason, right?
So it seems like Collins can draft that language as to how to not be overly bureaucratic with regard to presence required, as opposed to connecting it to, if you have an article that's being voted
Right.
on, you need to be present.
Okay. Yes, yes, yes.
Common sense says you should be.
Yeah, I know, exactly. But, common sense isn't very common. That's a problem, right?
Also, I was thinking back to that presentation on the last meeting. I can't remember for Anthony or Mel, which one of you said it, but the charter can actually just allow transparency.
Right.
So some of it, I feel like, well, at least from where I stand, it's looking for language that makes that common sense or that common understanding actually well documented and understood. So a random citizen could just look it up and make sense of it versus having to kind of navigate what might seem commonsensical to others, but could seem quite confusing.
No, I agree. I think that's something that should be documented, that they're expected to be there. Yep. Okay, and then I know it was Anthony or Melvin also suggested that we put in something about the location, that it has to be in the geography of town or some adjacent community, or maybe some wording on that. Because that was a
Yeah,
kind of a
yeah,
common
that's
thing. I think it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't hurt. We made it through COVID without having to do it, but who knows,
Yeah, right, it was
Who knows?
still a location in town, but
Right.
it's moved
But,
around.
You don't know, I mean, you could have a tornado or something come through and take out your school buildings and you need another location, something could happen, so it's good,
You're smart to think that way.
you never know.
We use the football field.
That's right. I hope it doesn't rain.
Been there, done that.
Been there, done that.
Or hope it does, depending on what's up.
Back to the quorum issue again.
Good point.
Okay, so now are there other things that we want to say, that we want addressed, that we want wording on, or do we have most of that now? What do we have? We talked
I did
about.
have a question. Let's see.
Okay, okay, go ahead, and then I'll go to mine. Go ahead, Charlotte.
Sorry, and this may come up if we talk about the representative town meeting style anyway, but I was wondering if one of the questions is around hybrid attendance for the open town meeting, whether that's even an option or something that we would want to add in the other considerations. Or maybe it's just.
Yeah, that's a whole other topic, and there's actually a really good session that the Acton League of Women Voters just did recently, because they did a big study on that, and they went to several towns, and they talked about that and other things related to this. I'll try to get that link and send it out to everybody.
Right. Representative town meetings can have remote participation, but not an open town meeting. Not yet, anyway, but.
Is that from a cost standpoint that the technology be too administratively burdensome in order to extend that?
I think it was just part of the emergency provisions under COVID, and
Okay.
that, they haven't adopted it formally everywhere. It was adopted in representative communities, and, and it's a trend. I mean, people have, asking, do I have to go to the town meeting? Why can't I vote from home? And, there's going to be I think we're heading that way.
And there's also the accessibility issue.
That's ADA is another, yeah, that's
Transportation
another one.
and-
I think that's what some of these towns had done it for specific cases where people really couldn't get there, but
I'd throw out that I think that might be something that town clerk, I believe I've had brief discussion with her in which she's got knowledge that she could, convey to us with regard to what are the challenges associated with that sort of remote voting, capability that we would have to consider
I think
as
there's
to
a
how
lot of, I think there's a lot of
viable it
other,
is.
I won't go into it now. I have a lot of concerns about it for
Yeah.
a whole lot of other reasons. So yeah, that's a whole, I think that could be a long discussion by itself, so we can do that for sure, because we should.
Madam
yes.
Madam Chair, sorry to interrupt you.
No,
You're having a great conversation. Just, I wanted maybe Mel to chime in here, because my understanding is that, just before you go down that path of exploring it, is that remote town meeting is illegal for open town meeting. You don't even have
Tim
the
just said, right.
ability to adopt that in the town charter. But Mel, maybe you can expand on that if you have a little bit more info.
No, just that Tim was right. It was really a COVID era innovation, and it was not felt, I think, practical to do it for an open town meeting, but more for a representative, which has a limited number of people. What I have seen is remote participation in meetings, not necessarily town meetings, but general meetings was very important. And I believe the House just passed something that would extend that. But for town meetings, Anthony is correct, for representative town meetings are the only ones that could do remote participation at a town meeting other than ADA issues that come up.
Okay. So we'd also talked about, you brought up like the zoning issues and have an issue with the timing, I guess, for town meetings and so on like that. And we wanted to ask the select board something about that, the zoning.
The board has talked about that they want to have a very specific timeline.
Mm-hmm.
There's a feeling that some zoning amendments have come to them very late in the process, and, I mean, really, they have to have a public hearing, but I think it would be nice to, get at least a heads up in January, February,
Yeah.
that something is coming down the.
All right, so if we
But
could
they
just
can
have
talk to
a
that.
placeholder on your documented items here for us, Anthony, and then when we have the people in next week or in 2 weeks, we can talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I'll just add that another thought that is out there is that the annual town meeting, that your budget, your fiscal things, the things you need to do to keep the government running.
Mm-hmm.
Some towns have been switching, their fall special town meeting is devoted to zoning or, specifically, so that, they separate the two, in other words, that they try to do it that way. So that's another thought.
But sometimes the fall
And
town
nobody's gonna
meetings,
show up.
well, sometimes the fall town meetings have been as long as a regular
Well, you're right.
anyway.
That's something the
given
board should
recently,
think
so-
about when they do the warrant, because it's been,
Right, okay, but it's good to have it on there, because we need to have that discussion.
okay.
Okay, so then, and so for our next meeting, we want to have the town administrator, right?
Yeah.
And somebody from the select board, I don't know if there's either
well,
Gary or
Gary-
Mark, I guess.
Gary.
Yeah, right,
Town clerk.
and the clerk.
Yeah.
Anybody else that we can think of that should be for this?
We also have finance committee.
Ask the LCTV to have one of their people present also, because the running of the town meeting really has a lot to do with the TV and getting everything up and running and timing. They put up all the boards for people hard of hearing,
Yeah.
Right,
so
but
not to necessarily,
not related to the charter, though, that's
No,
more
no.
operational stuff.
Yeah, that's operational.
You
okay,
think? You okay with that?
sure, absolutely.
Okay. Because I agree, those are very important things, but I
Right.
probably not.
Which is
the
why they
charter
wanted to
level.
move it off to Monday, so they'd have more time to get ready. Yeah.
Everybody, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, I was thinking more about the staff people in the office. I'm like, well, that's just the typical, couldn't do it last week, but for them, that really is a very real thing.
That's a good point, because that's
Yeah,
really
that's-
why that was changed.
Right, yeah, it was really for that. Okay, interesting. That's actually good feedback to that, actually, for me.
So
All right.
see, my point wasn't way out.
Never, never. Always love your input. All right, anything else? Anybody? All right, what else do we need to talk about, Anthony? Yeah, your hand's raised, I see it.
Just, I want to just clarify for my notes. Did you say that you wanted the draft charter to include a provision for having a regular in the spring and a regular in the fall, or do you want to have a provision about having a fall special town meeting?
I don't see any reason to change it at this point for our first draft. Do you, Tim?
You may know better than I do, but I didn't think you could have 2 annuals. But, it acts as practically the same thing, because we've tended to have very robust warrants for special town meetings in the fall, as everyone here can attest. So it's almost the same difference, but I didn't think you could. I thought everything had to be a special outside of the annual.
I've seen, Tim, some charters that define an annual town meeting and split it up like that. So I think with a charter, you have a little bit more flexibility to do something. We'll show you some examples of what's out there.
Or could we just designate the time frame, like it's the last week of October, or similar to what we did the first Tuesday of May? Is it the first Tuesday of November? Or, well, no, that would not be a good day, but the last.
I agree, Karen. I don't care what you call it, as much
Yeah,
as I
just set the
feel it's
time
rather
frame.
important to set the time frame. And we could consider asking the folks that are coming to the next meeting, do you think you're going to have an ongoing, robust list that's going to necessitate 2 town meetings, regardless of what you call them? And if they confirm that, they don't see it going back, then I think we could then get into and what would be the recommended date sequence with regard to similar to the first Tuesday of May.
Not to sort of beat a dead horse, but I just would feel remiss if I just didn't say this to the committee. And I'm not advocating for 2 town meetings, but just there are certain items that you can't vote on unless it's an annual town meeting. I think the one that just comes up for me that was most recent was the revocation of like a liquor license. So I had a community, we have a regular conversation with the Attorney General's office. So, for example, if they wanted to revoke a liquor license for an establishment, they would have to wait for the community would have to wait for the annual town meeting. So some communities that have adopted 2 annual town meetings, they had a regular special sort of in that place there, like we always have a regular, and they converted it to an annual specifically so that they can cover any of the topics that might not be appropriate for a special. So again, I'm not advocating that you do it or don't do it. I'm just letting you know that there has been sort of a legal distinction. If you don't define it as an annual, there may be some items you
Can you
can't
get us
do.
a list of what those things are that you can only do at an annual, so we know?
I don't have a list. It's sort of it's spread throughout things. And I actually had this conversation with the Attorney General. It depends on which law or which things are trying to be acted on. The one that I've sort of most recently sort of been familiar with is the revocation of a liquor license. But there are others.
Interesting.
But Anthony, so the point is that if you call it an annual meeting, you're good to go for anything, whereas if you call it a special meeting, you will have some restrictions. So maybe that's the way that we should be thinking about it. Are we okay with tolerating some, maybe as yet unknown restrictions for the full meeting? Or do we want to make sure that we could
You have to
theoretically
call it that.
cover everything?
Right,
And
we could
if
not
so,
have a
we would
special
want
in
to
the fall.
convert it to 2
There was no
annual
business.
meetings.
But it sounds like if you had 2 annuals.
But
you'd have
that
to
sounds
follow.
like the difference, right?
Well, that and the point Tim is
Correct.
bringing up is if you say you're going to have 2 annuals, then you have to have the second one, even though technically we wouldn't have to have a fall town meeting. It's hard to imagine that we would never do it, but it does lock you into having one, whether you need one or not, right?
You get stuck with it.
So that's
Yeah.
the plus and the minus. Yep, good point. All right, so to Anthony's point, I guess he just wants to know how do we want to, for if it's draft and it's not a decision, just for this first pass, do we want to say 2 annuals, or do we want to keep it the way it is now, 1 annual and keep the other one special?
Just keep it the way it is now.
In the meantime, Tim's going to go talk
It's
to all his
familiar
buddies
to
and think
everyone.
about things and see if there's other reasons why we should do it or not, right?
Right.
Okay.
I'd
All
like
right.
I'd like to wait on making a call until we talk to the people. There's a list. Are we going to provide this list of questions to the people we're inviting in? that they would come in prepared to address these questions? How is the town meeting currently administered? What are the challenges that exist? What is the charge to the people who are coming in so they're not coming in blind? What do we want them to do when they come in?
I think almost what's outlined right there.
Yeah, so how soon can we get this document from you, Anthony?
Well, we can have, I would say it'll be probably by the Friday before the meeting, but I'd recommend you actually share the memo with them. And then
Okay.
sort of really ask them these questions that you've sort of been through now, and then we can go through, I mean, you'll have this document by the Friday before the meeting, so you can also go through that with them as well. But there may be some things that are unique to them that they want you to know about their town meeting.
And then we could possibly add the question whether they think that an ongoing, regular, second annual town meeting would be beneficial or unnecessary. I'd love to hear what they think.
Yep, that's why they're coming, absolutely. Okay,
I think the idea of letting them know ahead of time.
Tournament season this March Madness.
This is
Well, just give them that memo, like he
all
said.
right, yeah,
These
just
are
give them
the
a
kind
memo.
of
Right,
questions.
this is what we're
the
talking
kind
about.
of questions.
Right.
There may be others.
Okay.
So do we feel that there is benefit in documenting the sense of this committee? Should we be documenting, assessing whether it is the sense of this committee that we should move to having a charter for this town? Will that be one of our recommendations? And if yes, should we document it through a formal vote or no?
Not yet, I don't think.
Well, that's what we were charged with that, right?
I thought that's what we were charged to do.
I don't think anybody has ever said we have to. It was recommended by the Department of Revenue, Division of Local Services.
I know, but the selectmen appointed this committee for that particular reason.
We'll call it a charter commission.
And they called it a charter commission. So that's what we're doing, is proposing a charter.
So you think that decision's already been made by someone other than us?
Yes.
That we're going to have it,
I mean, that's
okay.
not-
We're gonna propose one, and then they still have to decide whether they're gonna adopt it or not.
All right, I'm hearing different things.
No, that's.
No,
the same
no.
thing.
No, that's the same.
We're going to present a proposed charter. Whether they adopt it or not is up to them. We're not building it in
So
concrete.
someday when we make a presentation to the select board in the town, will we have a summary of what our recommendations are? And would the first recommendation from this committee be that we adopt a charter for this town?
The recommendation will be, here's the charter, do you like it?
It makes sense.
So yes, inherently, yes.
Yes.
It makes sense.
Got it. All right.
Is
yeah.
there a feeling that,
What,
why would we not adopt a charter?
Same reason others have cited here. We don't have one today. We don't need one.
If for some reason this board went through the whole process and found out that 9 months from now that we don't need a charter, then we could make that recommendation too. I mean, we are a charter commission, but it could come to, my feeling is that we're gonna adopt one, but if it comes to a point where we would have the option of saying no.
As is mine, all I'm suggesting is that as we move forward through our work, we as a committee adopt some protocols for how we devise a list of our recommendations. So I suppose this committee could say, we don't think we need a charter. I don't think anybody's saying that, but I suppose that would be within our purviews to say, we don't need a charter. We don't have one today, we don't need one.
Well, let me go back. I think Charlotte captured a point that I'll try to bring back, and correct me if I'm wrong, Charlotte. But I'm fine with taking a straw just to satisfy this, that we are directionally proceeding with the assumption that our conclusion at the end of our meeting time will be to proceed to recommend a charter, and our deliberations between now and then are going to consider aspects of what we think as we go through the timeline, the project, which aspects should be included in the charter and which should be separated into bylaws or kept out of both. And that way we can use that as a framework for our future discussions as to here, there, or stay away from it. I mean, I'd be fine with trying to push that. I don't know if you want a formal motion or a straw poll, but
Well, I think we should talk about how are we going to memorialize what we are recommending as a committee? What are we?
personally, I think at this point, it's too soon because we haven't had any discussions with any personnel. As I said earlier, I don't even know what you think about any number of topics that I think I need to hear your considerations, much like I heard them earlier tonight, that have impact with regard to how I'm thinking.
I'm not talking about any specific recommendations. I'm talking about when we do have a recommendation, what will be our manner of documenting it and presenting it?
Oh, okay.
And I would think that our first, so I didn't think anybody told us I would think whether we have a charter or not is in the purview of this committee to recommend or not. And it can be agreed to or not. And I would think one of the first recommendations, I think from what I'm hearing from this committee, would be that this town adopt a town charter. And as a result of that recommendation, we're empowering our consultant to do some work in that regard on behalf of this committee.
Kevin, a question to you on that. So
It already happened.
sorry, go ahead.
No, you go, Charlotte.
I sort of try to hold both in my head at the same time, in that this is the charter committee, and therefore we are moving, I think, directionally towards a charter. But my understanding is until we actually submit the charter, the report from this committee and the draft charter, that theoretically the decision isn't actually made until that very point. We could get, as someone said, to the end of this process, look at the sum of our work and determine we don't want a charter, but that decision point could still be taken further down the line. And to keep that live, in a way, I think is actually part of this process. That's my understanding of it, at least, that we are working towards both developing the charter, but also being critical along the way as to the necessity of a charter, and that our recommendations will be codified in the charter language itself and the report that will accompany the charter, so that, and then presumably also some materials that help others to understand and summarize those recommendations. And then my understanding was that would still be, as I think was alluded to, still have to be adopted by town meeting and even by the legislation. So whether or not we get one is kind of part of the process. But I would love to hear if that's not right, because that's what
I tend to agree. From my personal standpoint, I would just say, I don't really know yet. I don't know enough. I mean, we have to go through all this stuff and see what would be in the charter. And at the end, it's like, well, is this good for the town or not? Does this make sense? That's how I view it anyway.
That's not what I thought I heard. I thought we were talking, I'm fine not broaching that question. I thought that we were giving direction to start drafting and so forth.
Well, from my standpoint, the draft is still just it's just our work. That is how we're saying, this is the work, so let's talk about it, and that's. It'll be a work in process the whole way through, from my standpoint.
Great, so we're not sure at this point whether we would be, at this point, we're not sure whether we would be recommending a charter as part of our work.
I would say we still have the option as we go through the process to say, no, we're not going to.
Okay.
Everybody agree? I mean, that's just me. I don't want to.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, the assumption is that is the path we're going, but
Right,
until we get there, we're not there,
right.
kind of, right?
Like Joe said, we may get to the end of the road, and that's not
Yeah.
what we...
I don't see it happening, but it is
Yeah,
possible.
right,
It could happen, yeah.
Okay? All right. It's late. We've done enough of this for tonight, you think? I know there were other things. We talked about representative town meeting. I don't think we're going through that tonight. It's too late, right? Or is that a quickie? Otherwise, we have to. We have to
I think we can push that to
do
the next
minutes and some
meeting if
administrative
there's time.
things. What's that?
Next time.
I think we can push that to the next meeting if there's.
Okay. So we need to approve minutes from March 3rd, 2025. Anybody want to make a motion?
Yeah, I'd like discussion.
Oh, actually, go ahead. Yep.
So I just question in the last section.
Oh, so actually, why don't you make a motion first, and then we have discussion, right?
Okay,
Isn't
motion.
that how we do it?
Fine. Motion to approve.
Okay,
Second.
okay.
Okay,
Discussion.
So, on the last page, the discussion review section, Al, you're identified as raising concerns about addressing issues with the current town meeting process, such as repeated votes on failed measures. I know I made comments to that effect. I don't know if you.
I don't think I made those comments.
That's what I.
They'll sound like Rob comments.
That's what I suspected
Okay,
as
yeah.
well. So I thought, rather than tagging you with it, we should change that to be me. And
Noted.
and then I also want to point out that we did discuss, and so I'd like to put it not in this meeting, and not to change these minutes, but I'd just like to bring up the point that the last meeting, we did discuss public communication strategies that I would like to get onto agenda at a future meeting. But that doesn't change the minutes as they're given. I agree that that was said.
We can add it. Right, Charlotte?
Well, no, I think it needs to
Yeah, I
be a
think from
topic
that-
for
that-
a future agenda.
I know, okay, but you want to document in the minutes that we talked about this?
Oh, no, it's already there.
Oh,
It's
okay.
already
Oh,
there.
okay, I got it.
I just
Okay,
don't
so
want
it's on-
I don't want it missed as we
Probably
are
not.
moving
And
into
it's in the work
agenda.
plan, so it's out there in front of us. But yes, I agree, we'll do that. And then, only minor thing, I think a couple things, that there were motions made and seconds, it was by me, and it's, my last name is spelled wrong. It says Bolin or something in there instead of bowling, so you should probably put those corrections in for the minutes.
You're correct, the spelling of your name.
I guess the other part, just because this is the first set, Charlotte, how challenging was this? Because I know the select board originally envisioned paying somebody or having somebody from the senior tax work-off program do that, so I just want to understand how challenging this was for you, because you took it on, I think, with the idea that it wasn't going to be overly burdensome, and yet when I saw how many pages there were of this,
Let her tell you.
I thought maybe it was. Yeah, that's why I'd like to hear.
Yeah, Charlotte, explain the process for him.
Yeah, I think I got off kind of lightly on this one. So it actually was incredibly efficient and easy. Lisa prepared the first draft using AI. So I had already the meat, honestly, of the minutes prepared, and my role was really to go through them and validate. I did add a few things. Some of the motions were not exactly clear from, I guess, the recording, so I did have to check those. Added a couple points, but I would actually say it's not particularly burdensome. So the town's done a great job of really making that a much more efficient process.
Great.
Of course, some things do get missed, so I do want to make sure that we all have chance to review the minutes and validate them as we're doing now, just to triple check
Glad to hear it.
everything.
So
Yeah.
understood. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks for being concerned for it, because I was in the same thing, but yeah, it's a new world. So, so we approved the minutes as,
With that change.
with the updates? Okay? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right. Done.
Legally,
Oh, hey,
yeah, legally has to be roll
roll
call.
call vote, okay, so,
Rob Rounds, aye.
Tim Goddard, aye.
Alan McRae, aye.
Betsy Bowling, aye.
Joe Knox, aye.
Karen McCloskey, aye.
Kevin Brogan, aye.
Charlotte?
Charlotte Dolan's aye.
Okay. And then the only other thing I have administratively is the town emails. What I'm not sure yet is, we have the option to get a town email. I'm not sure if that's a requirement. I don't think it's going to be, but I don't know that for sure. But everybody got the information about setting up a town email, but most people have not, or not everybody has done it yet. Karen did, and Kyle, Alan, Tim, Joe. I guess most of us did. You didn't.
I
You did?
did.
You're not on the list.
I don't. So who should I inquire as to?
I don't know. I'll just say that you did. Well, I mean, I'll ask Lisa. I'll ask her
Yeah.
how come you're not showing up as having done it.
Yeah, thanks.
So I'll find out about that, because what we definitely need to do is have a official email distribution list, so we can all email each other without just copying another old email, then having that not be right and so on. So
Yeah.
we get that right and get.
If we could do it with just our normal email
so much.
operation.
I'd be happy, it's gonna be,
That would work out best for everybody, I think.
Yeah, some people like to separate it, but yeah, I agree. Okay, so I'll check on, that's on mine. I'll check on that for next time.
Next meeting date?
2 weeks from today, what's that? Let's see,
31st?
31st? 31st of March already?
Yeah.
Yikes. Actually, it's a good thing, but yikes. Okay, I can go screaming by.
thank you all.
Motion to
Motion to
adjourn?
adjourn?
So moved?
All those in favor?
Aye.
We don't have to do a roll call vote for that, do we?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Good morning, Charlotte. Have a great day.